Posing, no, I'll agree with that. Yeah, I don't know if I'm all that provocative. I think I'm a bit like a kipper, really. I flounder. Quite gracefully, but I flounder.
Even amongst the ragamuffins and likely lads of the UK punk scene, Ian Dury stood out. In his late 30s, with his left arm and leg withered from polio, and in love with Stax, Motown and free jazz. But that is also what made him transcend. Aided by the punk-funk backing of the Blockheads, his acerbic estuary wit was on full display on the band's only UK #1, an around-the-world jaunt that takes in Bingo Lingo, James Brown, and the universal appeal of copulation. This is New British Canon, and this is the story of Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick. Before there was the Blockheads, there was Kilburn and the High Roads. At the time, Dury was a lecturer at the Canterbury College of Art. As such, the Kilburns were assembled from a clutch of his Rolling Stones infatuated students, alongside some of his muso jazz friends. Initially formed in 1970, it wouldn't be until October 1971, and the death of Ian Dury's boyhood hero, Gene Vincent, that the band would be kicked into high gear. I really rated Gene Vincent, the visual aspect of him as much as the sound of it, but I loved that as well.
Well, the blue jean bar is the bar for me. Well, it's the bar, but so don't we? You dip your hip free and knee.
I had no idea that he had a bad leg until after he was dead. It was sort of a coincidence. In 1971, Gene Vincent died. He was the same age as Van Gogh, and I remember thinking, I ought to get a band together. 1950s rock and roll idol, Vincent, would be a looming presence in Dury's career, with many parallels, like the fact that both musicians wore a leg brace. Vincent had been in a motorcycle crash that shattered his left leg. Dury had contracted polio when he was 9, so possessed a weakened left arm and leg. Both cases influenced both artists' stage mannerisms, Dury clutching the mic stand for support as he glared into the audience, while striking a similar silhouette, with their dual slick black locks and black leather gloves. By the time the first workable version of Kilburn and the High Roads was gigging, Dury was mere months away from being 30, and felt that his chance to rock and roll may have passed him by. Many things stood in his way. For one, Dury couldn't really sing. Instead, what he brought to the rabble was his domineering Cockney white boy persona, and his elegant yet working class way with words.
When I was 15, I had a black tweed jacket and sideboards to my chin.
I'm a cocky dick about my words. I always thought that I didn't have any competition. I'm the best in the world by 100 miles. In a nutshell, I think I'm shit hot. The group toured the pub rock circuit of London throughout the early 70s. Similar to Brinsley Schwarz, Ducks Deluxe, and Chilly Willy and the Red Hot Peppers, the Kilburns were taking rock and roll back to its most elemental. Vincent, Eddie Cochran, and the Stones. But with Dury's group, they augmented these elements with touches of calypso, reggae, and 1950s novelty pop. Just as likely to reference Lonnie Donegan as Ornette Coleman, while often approaching the stronk of Captain Beefheart. Those that would make up the first generation of UK punk bands took notice of Ian Dury's mob, John Lydon taking Dury's confrontational mic stand leaning for his own, while Paul Simonon, later of The Clash, noted their rough boy image. You went to see Dr. Feelgood, the Alex Harvey Band, and Kilburn and the High Roads. And that was it as far as raw British rock and roll was concerned in the mid-70s. They were the tough guys, and Ian was one of the toughest. You felt he was coming from the same place as you. By 1975, they had toured relentlessly, supported The Who across the UK, and released their debut album, Handsome. Yet upstarts like Dr. Feelgood were getting the attention Dury felt he deserved.
Rock said, I didn't need to seek you out.
I'd seen them go screaming past us like a rocket ship. I started worrying that we were doing it wrong. You blame your agent, but he wasn't neglecting us. It was just their vibes were happening for the feel-goods, and they went roaring into the mystic. A shaky lineup, aggravated by Jury's habit of firing band members at a moment's notice for perceived slights, did not help matters. By the end of 1975, Kilburn and the High Roads were over. The short-lived Ian Dury and the Kilburns would follow, but soon also collapse. Their last show in 1976, supported by the Sex Pistols and the Stranglers. With the younger generation snapping at his toes, Dury would have to find another route to make his rock and roll dreams come true. Now 35, his potential to rock and roll was quickly passing Ian Dury by. But instead of rushing in without a plan, he would make sure he had assembled the best possible backing group before getting back on the scene. Keyboardist and guitarist Chas Jankel, who played in a late era lineup of the Kilburns, would become Dury's main songwriting partner, with whom he would spend the next year writing the majority of the songs for what would become his debut solo album. Having met Chas, it was pretty obvious we could write well together. All the time I was interested in making music you could dance to, that had jazz and funky influences. I didn't want slavish adherents like the average white band, who were almost copyists, although they were bloody good. I wanted to use that funk edge and be English as well. Chas thought along the same lines, and he was a genius. Along with not having the best control of his limited vocal range, Dury was not one for learning the finer points of songwriting, like chords or melodies, preferring it to be the unattainable magic he had always enjoyed it as. Jankel was essential to Dury's new songs being good. Dury was adept at rhythm, from his skiffle days on the washboard to the awkward beats he could conjure on his second-hand drum kit. His idea of rhythm was based on Zulu, that scene where you can hear the Zulus before you can see them, that incredible stomp before they come over the hill. It was the rhythm of survival, and as it happened, it suited the times perfectly. Aided by Dury's primal beats, one of the first tunes they would write together was Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll.
Sex and drugs and rock and roll.
I went down early one morning and started playing drums, a straight down the line groove. Behind me I heard Chas on piano, playing the Sex and Drugs riff. I heard what I wanted to hear, what I'd been waiting to hear for years. Superstition, that area of groove.
Sex and drugs and rock and roll is very good indeed.
Initially, Jankel found the hook hard to pass and fit along to a guitar line, until shocking everyone, Dury hummed out the melody. It was only later that Jankel realised he had poached it from an Ornette Coleman composition. When me and Jankel wrote the song, we stole the riff from a Charlie Haden bass solo on an Ornette Coleman record called Change of the Century. I met Charlie Haden later, and he told me that he nicked the riff too. It was a Cajun folk tune. The writing sessions also spawned a tribute to Dury's hero, Sweet Gene Vincent.
Sweet Gene Vincent, let the blue cats roll tonight.
Managing to fit in copious references to the man's life and songs, including hints towards Blue Jean Bop.
Blue Jean baby, Blue Jean baby.
Who Slapped John?
Who slapped John? Who slapped John?
Who slapped John?
And Bebopalula.
She's the woman with the flying feet.
As well as being a celebration, the song also ruminates on Vincent's missed chances, ending up as it could have been, with a couple of half-forgotten hits, instead of a Presley. It hits hardest because this was a fate that could quite easily befall Dury. He did so much research on Vincent, and wrote so much material, that unedited, it would have taken 15 minutes to perform. It was prolific. It was really tough. You know how a single should be 3 minutes something. We'd just about have got up to the middle 8 if I had kept all his verses. With song structure, you can't get away with more than 3 choruses, and more than 6 or 7 verses, unless you're Bob Dylan. All the songs had a quintessential Britishness about them, whether it be the music hall character study or Billericay Dickie.
I'm Billericay Dickie and I'm doing very well.
The rapid fire rhyming slang of Blackmail Man. Or the inflammatory opening of Plaistow Patricia.
Arseholes, bastards, fucking cunts and pricks.
About the language of Plaistow Patricia's opening salvo, Jury commented, "Kids all love swearing. I'm only swearing for the kids. I'm not swearing for the oldsters, but I'm very careful about swearing on record. Just enough. In real life I swear as much as possible. But when I wrote Plaistow Patricia, it seemed the only way to do it was to get rid of it in one line." Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll would not make it onto the album, instead released as a standalone single on Stiff Records in August 1977.
Keep your silly ways, or throw them out the window, the wisdom of your ways.
Though banned from radio due to its subject matter, it became a trademark song for Ian Dury, and an anthem for the burgeoning punk movement, despite the song's mutant funk rhythm, at odds with the hyperactive bluster around them.
Sex and drugs and rock and roll.
It would sell 19,000 copies, but it would not chart. Dury would record his debut solo album at the same time. Alongside Jankel on keyboards and guitars, Dury would bring together a bunch of musical ringers, including the immaculate rhythm section of Norman Watt Roy on bass and Charlie Charles on drums, with sprinkles of Ed Spite on guitar, Jeff Castle on Moog, and former Kilburn, Davey Payne, on saxophone. As Dury's new backing band, they would be named the Blockheads, named after the song of the same name. The album would be named after some signage Dury had seen while walking down a London high street. New boots and panties, which is also what Dury joked was the only clothing he didn't acquire second hand. It would be the outcome of 7 years of hard work and struggle, trying to break through in the field of music, and his anger at having been overlooked for so long is undeniable. Amongst the contemporaneous bunch of barely competent punks, it shone with its defiant musicality. Released in late September 1977, a month before the Sex Pistols' debut, its mix of ragamuffin wordplay, rock and roll, musical, and punk reggae would enter the UK album chart at number 53, but would remain within the top 75 for 2 years, peaking at number 5 in January 1979. Though it would get glowing reviews in The Village Voice and Rolling Stone, the album failed completely in America, where Dury's Cockneyisms were basically another language, and he was dropped by Stiff's US distributor, Arista. The first live airings of the songs off New Boots and Panties with the Blockheads would occur on the Stiff's live tour in October 1977, where their label assembled some of their most promising acts, including Elvis Costello, Nick Lowe and Reckless Eric, and set them loose on the UK. The tour was intended to have an alternating headliner, such was Stiff's belief in their artists, but ended up as a battle between Costello and Dury for the top spot, with Costello not helping himself by not wanting to play anything from his sole released album. As such, Dury became the de facto top billed, most nights concluding with all the artists coming on stage to sing Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll. The ensuing attention on the band ensured that their March 1978 single, What a Waste, would be their first actual hit, managing to reach number 9.
I should be glad to be so inclined. What a waste, what a waste, rock and roll guys.
Ian Dury's most enduring single, though, would arrive by the end of the year. Completed in July 1978, Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick had been in slow gestation, Dury having certain lyrics as far back as 1974.
Hit me with your rhythm stick. Hit me. Je t'adore, ich liebe dich.
The repeated hit me's were a catchphrase he'd been compelled to chant while gesturing with his walking stick when the band were travelling on their 1978 US tour.
Hit me, hit me, hit me.
It was about rhythm and dancing, and it was also saying, "Dance, don't hit me." Chaz accused me of nicking it off a George Clinton record, but I disagree. The hit me phrase is really James Brown.
Hit me, hit me.
But who cares? Despite being in the back of his mind for almost half a decade, Jury kept refining Hit Me's wording. The lyrics were changing all the time.
It's nice to be a lunatic.
Used to be, "It don't take arithmetic," so they were slightly different, but Ian had a map in his head of what he wanted. The exuberant and saucy lyricism mostly nods to one thing, the element that ties the world together, from the deserts of Sudan to Santa Fe, that most everyone enjoys a fuck.
Hit me, das ist gut, say, fantastic. Hit me, hit me, hit me.
With that theme in mind, Jankel based the composition on an accented piano riff he had created on the New Boots and Panties track, Wake Up and Make Love With Me. We'd got a great funk vibe going, a kinda Latin funky vibe, and the next day when I came back I had a new idea, having listened to Wake Up and Make Love With Me the previous night. Ian had moved the drum kit and piano outside into his garage, and when I showed him what I'd done, he went off into the house and fetched the lyrics he'd written.
Hit me with your rhythm stick. Two fat persons, click, click, click.
Musically, Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick has a lot going on. Alongside Jankel's piano is the screeching, dueling sax solo from Pain.
Hit me, hit me.
Johnny Turnbull's guitar synth that dips in and out.
Hit me, hit me.
As well as Watt Roy's eccentric, tireless, 16 notes to the bar bass line.
Move their body to and fro.
Recorded live in 11 takes with limited overdubs, it was an uneasy mixing job for producer Laurie Latham. While I thought the bass should have been a bit more of a feature, that for a funk part it was a little subliminal.
Hit me, says sie bon, he says nichts. Hit me, hit me, hit me.
People always pick up on it. They always talk about the bass on that track. To me it was a bit airy and could have sounded a little punchier, but I have to say that it leaps out when you hear it on the radio. So it's got something about it. Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick was released in November 1978, after a 6-week climb from number 44 to number 2, only to remain there for a fortnight, behind the Village People's YMCA.
It's fun to stay at the YMCA.
On the third week though, Hit Me would hit the top spot, which after the Boomtown Rats' Rat Trap,
It's a rat trap, and you've been caught.
would be the second new wave song to get a number 1 in the UK charts.
Hit me with your rhythm stick. Hit me, hit me. Je t'adore, ich liebe dich.
The week after it would be overtaken again by Blondie's Heart of Glass, the third new wave number 1. Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick would go on to sell 1 million copies, and as of February 2020, was the 115th best-selling British single of all time. Despite its success, neither Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick nor What Waste would appear on Jury's second album, Do It Yourself. Said co-founder of Stiff Records, Dave Robinson, "We didn't particularly have a problem with this, although it did affect sales. But Ian wanted to be a legendary artiste, and in Ian's mind, legendary artists like the Beatles and Stones usually kept their singles off albums. In the annals of pop music, Ian Dury and the Blockheads are probably not remembered in the same light as the Beatles or Stones, but their influence is still felt. Any UK artist that unashamedly sings with their regional British accent owes a debt to Dury, be that Madness, Dexy's Midnight Runners, Billy Bragg, The Streets, or Jamie T. The Blockheads' impact on Britpop is also under-acknowledged, with Blur's mockney tall tales of likely lads on Parklife.
I get up when I want, except on Wednesdays when I get rudely awakened by the dustman.
Colin's Eel, and Charmless Man.
When you put it all together, there's the model of a charmless man.
Mirroring those of Billericay Dickie or Pladstow Patricia. Furthermore, Oasis's bass-urged titling of Cigarettes and Alcohol was probably inspired by the prevalence of the phrase sex and drugs and rock and roll, popularized by Jury. It can even be argued that his 1979 single, Reasons to Be Cheerful Part 3, is the first rap record, with its disco funk backing and Jury's rhythmic spoken word rhymes.
Summer Buddy Holly, the working folly, good golly Miss Molly, and boats. Hammersmith Parry, the Bolshoi Bally.
Not that it had any effect on the burgeoning scene emerging out of the Bronx in New York. It was about 3 months before Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang.
I said a hip hop, the hip it to the hip hop, you don't stop the rocker to the bang bang boogie, say up jump.
I thought they'd been listening to my song, but then I'd realised we'd gone to the same source, The Last Poets, James Brown.
Is it true that recently Bob Geldof said you was dead on the wireless?
Listen,
That's not right, is it?
slightly under-researched statement, you could say. I'm still here, kicking up sparks.
You're definitely there. You're
I'm
definitely
here.
there. All on full form. I'm pleased to see now.
Ian Dury died in March 2000 at the age of 57. His critical acclaim has only increased after his passing. In May 2020, The Guardian named Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick as the 18th best UK #1 single of all time. Wrote Dave Simpson. Today, his best known tune still sounds fresh and wonderfully off-kilter, a beacon of pop's ability to embrace oddity and celebrate the other. He may not have had the best voice or been able to retain band members, but he remains one of the greatest lyricists Britain has ever produced. Das ist gut? Say fantastique. Thanks for watching. So what did you think? Let me know by commenting down below. If you like this video, like, subscribe, and why don't you also do me a favour and share it with a couple of people? It really does help. Also, I'd like to shout out this month's new top tier supporter over on Patreon, Graham Gibby. Thank you so very much. And I will see you in 2 weeks' time for something ethereal, otherworldly, and Icelandic.